Well, I was born in New Orleans on February 20th, 1958, and at the age of 10 years, I began to take music lessons at school, and I joined the school band. And my first instrument actually was guitar, but the school ensemble was a wind ensemble, so I had to pick an instrument appropriate for that particular setting. And the cornet is my first instrument, which is simply a smaller version of the trumpet. Most of the guys played cornet back then. Well, I grew up in a neighborhood surrounded by veteran musicians, the likes of Danny Barker, Dave Fatman Williams, Ernest Cagnolati, and most of the young people that I was associated with in my neighborhood played in band. Maybe 3 out of every 5 children played a musical instrument in my neighborhood. And by the time I was 12 years old, I was leading a band, the Fairview Baptist Church Christian Marching Band, which was a brass band. And during that time, in 1970, there were no other brass bands consisting of young musicians who were under the age of 18 years. And so I was 12, and I'd say by the time I was 16 years old, I knew I wanted to be a performing artist. I think it's a story for many of the musicians who have gone on to become professional musicians who are from New Orleans, but not everybody. I mean, not everyone plays a musical instrument in New Orleans, and not everyone dances and gets into traditional jazz. But for me, I was introduced to traditional New Orleans jazz by Danny Barker. And if he would not have introduced me to the music at the time when I really began to understand and love it, I would have ultimately been a musician, but I probably would have gotten into the traditional music much later. I wrote my first musical composition when I was 19, but I don't consider that, it wasn't a jazz tune. Actually, I had written a couple of things. Okay. I would have to say that I really got serious about composing in 1993, which is during the time when I got a record deal with Columbia Records, Sony Music, later to become Sony Music, and I released a recording, How to Mow Cream from the Crop, which is the title track and an original instrumental piece of mine. Okay, I'm gonna play something up. I have a very long relationship with JazzAscona. It used to be called New Orleans JazzAscona Festival, or when I first visited in 1995, possibly 1996 if my memory doesn't fail me. And I appeared on the festival as a sideman in my first visit, performing with a drummer by the name of Trevor Richards. The following year, I came back with my trombone player at that time, Craig Klein, and we had a rhythm section that was based in Germany, from Frankfurt, Germany, with a great pianist by the name of Dirk Raiffeisen. And then the following year, I brought my rhythm section from New Orleans, and every year thereafter, for about 8 years consecutively, I was appearing on the festival with my own quintet. Playing music and being involved in the arts, especially playing jazz music, provides an opportunity for a professional musician to travel the world and go to places where even he's appreciated more than he's appreciated in his own hometown. I met Uli Wooner here in Ascona, and we became friends, not only good friends, but musical friends, and we enjoyed each other, and we have been associated with one another ever since then. So over the past 2 decades, every 2 years we make a tour together. This is the first time that we are actually performing together in JazzAscona as a band. I have been doing a tour with him from Switzerland and Bavaria, southern Germany, over the past 20 years. So we have a good relationship musically, and we're really, really good friends. Well, jazz came from America. That's just identified as it is, you know, and arguably jazz was born in my hometown, New Orleans, at the end of the 19th century. In the beginning of the 20th century, people like Buddy Bolden and Louis Armstrong, who were from New Orleans, they were the pioneers of this music that has become known as American classical music. And of course, it's composed of a combination of the African rhythms and the European chords and melodies that the slaves were chanting and singing work songs during the time when there was slavery in America, in the South. And so it's important, I think, for a lot of young musicians to understand the history of where the music came from. Always, as far as I can remember, my first trip to Europe was in 1982, and I brought a band over. I was only 24 years old, and I played in the Netherlands, and I played in France. And I've always been I felt more appreciated in Europe than I did in my own country, playing this music. The only reason that I play the music the way I play it, my interpretation or my concept, is because I grew up in the time that I grew up in. I grew up in a period where there were other musical genres that I had been influenced by. There was a time, for example, when Louis Armstrong was playing music and coming up, then there was this swing music. But for me, growing up as a young man in the 60s, a young boy in the 60s and a young man, teenager in the 70s, you know, I heard funk and I heard fusion, jazz. Of course, I heard classical music as well, and I was taking music lessons. I was exposed to zydeco music from the western part of Southwest Louisiana, gospel music. So all of those different idioms have influenced my manner of speaking, my improvisational approach to playing jazz. Yet I also appreciate and have listened to and studied the old styles. And so I like to describe my playing as I have 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the present, and I'm looking to the future. Yeah. My parents exposed me to a lot of music. They weren't musicians, but they had a lot of records that I listened to even before I realized what was really happening in the music. Jazz music is music that is from the heart and spirit, and it's music that makes people feel good. And it has brought musicians and people together, music lovers together from all corners of the globe. I've been to every country, every continent except Antarctica. I've played everywhere. And everywhere I've been, I've met great musicians, and they didn't have to be from New Orleans to be great musicians or from America to be great jazz musicians. There are great jazz players everywhere. But there's something special about New Orleans jazz and New Orleans people, New Orleans music. I think that's why this festival has a premise on New Orleans. And everywhere you see, it used to be called New Orleans JazzAscona, and it's JazzAscona now, but there's still the overshadowing of New Orleans, because that's the festival started as a festival that particularly exhibited music from New Orleans, traditional jazz, and people love this music. There's something about it that makes them want to dance, it makes them happy. Less jazz, for sure.